Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a 3-part mini-series that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. Something a little bit different and extremely strange. Without further ado, let's get straight into that with a series entitled The Government Human Experiments, Part 1. Let's get straight into that. I sat at the desk in my little corner office, looking out the windows behind my chair, enjoying the vibrant colours of the setting sun. One of my favourite things was always to watch the sun rise and set, the beginning and the end. I took a draw from my pipe and enjoyed the taste of the smoke before I inhaled. As much as I enjoyed the short moments of peace like this, I knew they were not going to last very long. A man with skill sets like mine were always in high demand, and people always find a way to figure out where people like me go, even if we try to disappear. I took another draw from my pipe and let out an exaggerated exhale, knowing that my next task was about to come up. I swiveled my chair around and picked up my phone, sliding the bar at the bottom of the screen to answer the phone. A very hoarse voice spoke into the phone, speaking clearly but quickly. "New assignment came up for you. Meet your handler under the central bridge in 30 minutes. Click." The sound of the line ending was the only goodbye I was given. I took one last straw from my pipe and dumped the charred tobacco into my trash can. A little sad the bowl was only halfway done. I put the pipe in my top right drawer and grabbed my keys, and then began to make my way to the car. As I walked around the empty parking garage, I got to the jet black sedan and proceeded to start the car. The news came on the radio, announcing the 30 teenagers to go missing in the past 6 months still had not been found. I found it quite strange that this many kids were disappearing, but more so that the fact that all of them were around the ages of 17 to 18, high school aged. I switched the radio to first jazz station I could find in hopes of relaxing a bit before this next contract came in. As I navigated through town, I glanced at my watch and saw it had been 20 minutes since the call came in. I picked up the pace a little, as I didn't want to make the habit of pissing off my employers. I pulled up to the bridge and put my 2 quarters in the parking meter, giving me 30 minutes of time to take care of business. I took to the stairs to the sidewalk beneath the bridge and began to walk underneath the bridge. I glanced at my watch and saw that it was now exactly 30 minutes since I got my call. "Excuse me, sir. Could you please spare some change for a homeless old man?" The bum sitting in the shadows asked me without making eye contact. "Of course I can, here," I said with my stern, deep voice as I pulled a 20 out of my pocket and handed it to him. It was at this point that everyone around us had cleared away, and after doing one final glance to the left and right, he stood up and dusted himself off. I really hate doing this cover-up sometimes, you know. Being a fucking homeless guy. Hell, I have to jump in a dumpster every time to get the authentic smell, so no one suspects anything. My handler, Siver, complained. Blah, save the sob story for someone who actually gives a shit. Last I checked, you don't get called during your relaxation times to come and clean up messes that other people seem to have huge habits of making. I responded. "Watch it there, Conte. We all answer to a superior. You should know your time spent in special forces." He began to lecture me. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. You fucking government types never know when to shut up. Listen, it's getting late on a Friday. You smell and look like shit, and people could be beginning to start walking here at any moment. Hurry up and tell me what's going on, I sharply responded. Silver let out an exaggerated gasp. "Since you asked so nicely, there's been a government project in town that recently shut down. Something to do with human trials and experimentation, possible genetic splicing and alteration. We don't know the location of where it is, but we know it's within 100-mile radius of the town. The only problem is the division files are all disappeared and there was no backups at all. So let me get this straight. You're going to have me search this town and the surrounding area in hopes that I stumble upon a secret government lab, which you also know nothing about?" I questioned, becoming increasingly annoyed. "No, we know the location of a scientist who worked there. He's trying to flee the country, but so far we've been able to cancel or redirect his flights. He's in a town about 3 hours' drive from here. We had the motel room and everything that he is staying in. There will be a folder in your apartment with all the relevant information about him. With the meeting finally done, I shook Siver's hand and made my way back to the car. I began the drive back across town to return to my apartment building and get ready for my upcoming mission. I parked in a lot outside my apartment and made my way to the second floor, to the room at the very end of the hallway. I turned my key in the lock and walked indoors, enjoying the homey smell my apartment has. I lit a candle and put my kettle on the stove. I pulled out my favourite mug and filled my diffuser with green tea leaves. With all the prep work done, I proceeded to my bedroom. Inside was a black armoured trunk, a dresser, and then my rather closet that contained a collection of suits. I began to take my clothes off and look in my full body mirror as I did. As the layers came off, I observed my medium stocky build, my abs and my muscular arms, and the veins protruding from my arms and neck. I ran a hand over my silky smooth dome, and then brought it down to twiddle with my moustache. As I stood naked in the room, I slipped on a pair of pyjama pants and my bathrobe. I walked out into the living room as the kettle began to whistle and poured my cup of tea. With my tea in hand, I sat down at my desk in the living room and turned on the lamp. A black folder with big red letters that read "Classified" laid on the desk. I took a sip of my tea and began to dive in. Dr. Jonathan Clouts, 38 years old, PhD in human genetics and biology, attended school at MIT, Stanford, and Notre Dame, graduated valedictorian of his class for all his degrees. Now, with all these credentials, what were you doing, working for the government? I spoke aloud to myself, genuinely curious. I looked at the picture of the man that was included. He appeared to be about 6'2". He was very slender with straight blonde hair and round eyeglasses. I had no doubt that getting information out of this guy would be no problem at all. Eggheads like him usually never spent time getting physical when they were younger, and typically have a low pain tolerance. I smiled a wolf's grin as I thought about how much fun this was going to be. It had been a while since an assignment like this had come in. Attached in the file was a paper with all the information and instructions I would need. Acquire location of lab from Dr. Clouts. Acquire any relevant information about experiments that occurred at the lab. Find out if he told anyone. If there are any copies of data, anyone else from the lab around. If so, find copies of data and destroy them. After all intelligence has been ascertained from him, terminate him. Find anyone he may have told or who also worked in a lab and terminate them. Report back at phone number redacted with findings for further instructions after task is complete. He is located at city, zip code, motel name and room number redacted. With my mission and task clear, I made my way into the room and got on top of the twin-sized bed in the corner of my room. I shut my eyes and within seconds, sleep enveloped me. I opened my eyes smoothly and sat up out of bed, looked at the red numbers on the nightstand next to my bed. It read 0330. I flipped on the lights to my room and unlatched the top of my trunk. As I opened the top, the extensions of the inside folded out to the left and right. I pulled out a pair of my black tactical pants as well as a plain black t-shirt. I put on my clothes and then slapped on a pair of black combat boots as well. Cliché, I know, but if it works, it works. From the right extension, I selected my favourite folding pocket knife and grabbed my trusty sidearm. I ran my hands along the opaque metal of the 1911, feeling the heavy weight and cool steel in my hands. I took a glance at the smiley face sticker on the handle and smiled a little. I grabbed the black suppressor and screwed it onto the end of the barrel. I grabbed my 3 magazines, loaded one in the pistol and racked the slide. The other 2 I put in a designated pockets on my pants. I slid the pistol into the holster on my pants and I looked at myself once over in the mirror before I closed my trunk and made my way to the kitchen. My coffee machine already had my brew ready, so I put it in my travel mug and grabbed the protein bar from the cabinet. Sadly, there was no time for a complete breakfast this morning. By the time I had made my way to the neighbouring city where Dr. Clouts was hiding, it was about 7 a.m. and the sun was beginning to come up. I needed to work quickly if I was going to grab him. I pulled into the motel parking lot and parked as close to the room as I could get. It was a shitty run-down roach motel with the only other parked car at the front desk. I approached the door that was his room number and pulled out my lock-picking kit. Within seconds I had the door unlocked and drew my sidearm. I walked into the room and locked the door behind me. I made my way to where the bed was and I noticed the still body that was there. I turned on the lights to the room and ripped off the covers. Dr. Clouts awoke with his eyes wide, filled with terror as he saw a menacing bald man in his motel room, toting a pistol. "Good morning, Doctor. I don't know if your secretary told you, but I happen to be your first appointment of the day," I said with a smile on my face. Who are you?" he questioned, with his lip quivering and entire body shaking with fear. "I'm room service. I'm here to clean up your room. Not very bright of how many degrees you have, huh? I replied sarcastically. His eyes became even wider as he made the conclusion of who I was and why I was here. No, no, please! I beg you! Don't kill me! I swear, I didn't know that we'd be experimenting on children. I only wanted to do what was best for humanity, but I didn't want to do it like this, he pleaded. It wasn't my fault. I was only following orders. They said that they wanted results and that they would be bringing up the test subjects and we were to ask no questions about it. Wait, what the fuck are you talking about? I became slightly heated. I aimed my pistol at him. You better explain, and you better do it in plain English too. We were part of a research group. We were tasked with increasing the survival capabilities of human beings. They would give us test subjects and have us splice up the DNA of these subjects with different species to try and get results. Sometimes it would be octopi, cuttlefish, cockroaches, any animal that was deemed to have a desirable survival trait. I wanted out the moment they started bringing in the children as test subjects, but I swear that it did not want this. He explained to me. All right, I'm going to ask you a few questions and I promise that it's in your best interest to tell me the truth. Does anyone else know about this? Is there any collection of data about what you were doing? And where is this lab? I questioned him. The only copies of the data are in my lab, and I'm the only one who knows the details of the lab. Everyone else was either killed or lost in the lab when we had a breakout. I was fortunate enough not to be in the lab that day that it happened, and so that's why I was running, he told me. Wait, you said breakout. What breakout? What the fuck do you mean breakout? I thought this was a research lab, not a damn prison. I was getting more and more annoyed by the second. We were doing human experimentation in the labs. The breakouts were the test subjects getting out of their cells and beginning to attack the scientists. As a failsafe, the lab got locked itself and it's impossible to get in without my universal login code for the terminals, he stated. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to write down where the lab is, how I get there, and the login code for me to get in. Well, your last few moments on this earth are going to be incredibly painful, I told him. He got a piece of paper and began to write out what I asked him. After what I've seen, after what I've done, I welcome death. If there is a hell, I earned it one-way ticket there. That's for certain. The lab entrance is in the basement of the local high school. Just follow these directions and when you get to the basement, you'll see an old computer. Type in this login code and the elevator will take you down. Please just know, the horrors you will see down there, they can't be unseen. Yeah. Horrors, scary shit, just give me the paper. I snatched it out of his hands. After looking over what he gave me, I proceeded to put 2 rounds in his head and 1 in his chest. I then holstered my pistol and made my way out of the room, locking the door and putting the do not disturb sign on the door handle. I got into my car and drove a few miles away and pulled out my phone. I dialed the number given in my folder and the phone began to ring. When it was picked up, I stated, Dr. Clouts has been dealt with. The location of the lab has been obtained. All copies of relevant data are in the lab, and no one else outside of the lab knows what's going on. I briefed over the phone. The same hoarse voice that called me originally the day before replied, Excellent. Return back to town. You're going into the lab and cleaning up this clusterfuck of a mess. I want this issue solved within 48 hours. Call the same number when you are done and proceed with extreme caution. No one knows what is going on in that lab. The usual audible click indicating that my conversation was over gave me a bit of satisfaction. I never knew why I enjoy doing things like this, but man do I have a ball with them. I opened the centre console of the car and pulled out one of the cigars. I opened the windows and proceeded to cut the end of it. I then put the cigar in my mouth and lit it, enjoying the smoky flavour. As I put on my sunglasses, I pulled my car onto the interstate and began my journey back home. As the words of Dr. Clouts sunk into me, I began to have a feeling of dread. Human experiments, gene splicing with other species, children. Ugh. I shuddered at the last thoughts and pushed it out of my mind. Best not to think about it until I absolutely have to. The government human experiments. The lab. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. I rolled up to my apartment building at about noon. I would have been here sooner, but I stopped at a burger joint on the way back from dealing with Dr. Clouts. There was nothing I love more than a tasty burger and fries with a Coke. I thought back to all the times I would be in foreign countries and would not have access to American food. It's the little things like this that you miss when you're kicking indoors and helping overthrow foreign governments. Medium well, pickles, lettuce, grilled onions, and just a dab of spicy mustard, melted American cheese. toasted sesame seed bun, even though I ate it 90 minutes prior. The thought of it once again began to make my mouth water. I locked the door to my apartment and began my usual routine of setting my kettle and diffuser. If there was one thing I learned from my time in Asia, a cup of green tea is one of the most efficient ways to keep a clear mind and level head. After the kettle was done whistling and my tea was made, I sat down at my table and pulled my map of the city. Using the address Dr. Clouts provided me with, I circled the location on my map. One of the local high schools, which coincidentally happened to be about 8 miles outside of the town. I felt a frown forming on my lips. I was already beginning to not like the feel of this assignment. I dialed the number on my handler, curious about how I was supposed to approach this time of mission. After a few rings, the receiver picked up. "Cyber, this is Conte. I'm curious about how I'm supposed to handle this phase of the assignment. I know I need to destroy all data stores that are contained in the lab. What about any surviving scientists inside? Also, what am I to do about any of the experiments that may still be alive inside?" "This is a total liquidation and cleanup. Simple solution. If it is breathing and alive in that lab, terminate it. There can be no witnesses and no liabilities about what occurred in that lab. It was an unsanctioned lab, and the public cannot find out about what was going on in that lab. This isn't just about preserving the image of the government, but if other countries were to find out what we were doing, experiments to weaponize genetic enhancements, it could lead to the collapse of the world and the start of World War III. Once you are finished cleaning out the lab, report back to your apartment. We will update you when a transport vehicle will be outside to take you in for your debrief. Cyber out." After the very audible click, I placed my phone down and began to think of all the possibilities of what could go down there. No information at all regarding lab structure, layout or anything. I don't even know how many experimental people were inside. A smile crept onto my lips. They always leave the fun jobs for me. Before I made my way to the high school, I stopped by my storage unit in the downtown area. I looked up at the dark clouds that were beginning to form and blot out the sun. After using my keys to block the door, I slid upward, moved inside and closed it behind me. I reached for the light switch, and when my bright light illuminated the room, my eyes went wide with an excitement I haven't felt in a long time. Ever remember going to a toy store or candy store when you were 5, and that excitement that you felt? That was me when I remembered how much ordnance I had in this little 10 by 10 storage unit. All along the walls were a variety of different types of weapons, from sniper rifles to shotguns to more pistols. Very few jobs require me to grab supplies from this storage unit, and I could feel my heart rate increasing as the adrenaline shot through my body at the thought of equipping myself with some of my weapons. I grabbed one of my large black duffel bags from the corner and zipped it open, ready to start selecting my gear for the mission. I had replaced my tactical t-shirt with a long sleeve version, as to protect my arms from whatever may be in there. I grabbed my body armour for my shins, upper body, elbows and knees from the wall and placed all of that in the duffel. In addition, I pulled one of my old vests off the wall and put that with my equipment as well. I didn't know what was down in that lab, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out of ammo. The helmet I selected had a flashlight built on the side of it, and in addition to that, I grabbed the shotgun with a flashlight attached in the front of the pump mechanism. It was a nice black steel and was cut down on the barrel and stock to provide maximum manoeuvrability indoors. I grabbed another pistol off the wall, almost identical to the one in my holster currently. Lastly, I opened a little trunk in the corner. I grabbed my 8-inch razor-sharp knife, as well as a few incendiary grenades. Fragmentation don't work too well indoors. Too much concussive force. And with my loadout ready, I zipped up the bag, turned out the lights, and made my way back to the car. After putting the duffel in the trunk, I made my way to the school. After dealing with 5 o'clock traffic, I arrived at the school late in the night. The rain had begun to pour down heavily. I looked at the instructions on the paper again and read that the entrance was in the basement of the gym. It was currently the summer term, so I wouldn't have to worry about students or teachers arriving early in the morning. I got my duffel bag from the trunk and made my way over to the doors of the gym. After kicking in the door, I went on the basketball court and began to suit up with my equipment. As I slid on the body armour and vest, I forgot how heavy it makes your body feel, almost as if I was 50 pounds heavier. I began to slide my extra shotgun shells and pistol magazines into the vest, beginning to add even more weight. Better to be safer than sorry. Second chances were rarely given in this line of work. The knife attached to my right boot, a good little backup to have if my weapons were locked away or became unusable. I attached the grenades to my vest as well, attaching them by the pin. This was so that all you had to do was pull it off and chuck it. With my equipment on, I began to make my way into the basement. The basement lights wouldn't turn on, so I already had to turn on my helmet lamp. The smell down here was absolutely terrible. I know it's a gym basement, but this smell went beyond the smell of gym clothes and containing the sweat of 3 generations of pubescent boys. This was almost a rotting corpse smell. The only door I saw was a wooden one in the far corner of a titled room with the words, "Cleaning Supplies," stamped on it. I approached it and grabbed the handle. No luck. The door was locked, and there was no visible lock on the outside of the door either. As I began to knock on the door to hear for a weak point, it was that I noticed that this was not a wooden door but a metal one. Pretty thick too, by the sound of it. I began to look around for a computer, as this must be the entrance to the lab. I found one in a little office near the stairway. I entered. As I hit the power button, a terminal screen appeared. It requested the login information with a username and password. I pulled the little note out of my pockets and began to input the information. User, Dr. J. Clouts. Password. The cake is a lie. After pressing enter, I heard several locking mechanisms undone as the door in the corner swung open. Glancing inside, I shined my light down and saw that there was a spiral staircase going down at least 100 steps. I began my descent down the creaky metal steps, not knowing what was waiting for me down at the bottom. After I descended the 122 steps to get down, they led to a hallway. The hallway was lit with very bright lights, somewhat reminiscent of a hospital. At the other end was a giant vault door, and a control panel of about 4 feet before it. I went up to the control panel and slid the handle off the top of it. After I did that, large yellow lights flashed along with a loud beeping noise. A huge waft of decaying flesh hit me that nearly made me throw up right there and then. I had dealt with some bad shit before, but this smell was on another level. I now turned on the flashlight of my shotgun. As past the vault door, there was only red emergency lights on. After stepping through, I found myself in another hallway, with office windows and doors along both sides that ended in another hallway at the other end. With steady caution, I began to make my way to the end of the hallway. Looking around, I noticed some light fixtures were broken, open. Wiring and wall was chewed through. But weirdest of all, the air vents were busted out. Only they had been busted out from inside the air shafts. A slight shiver went down my spine as I thought of something crawling in the ventilation system. The smell was getting progressively worse, but yet there was still no bodies or parts of bodies anywhere. Blood was all over the place, yet there was no bullet casings or sign of weapons at all. I made it to the end and looked at the signs. To the left was the mess hall and the living quarters. To the right was the research labs. Down the right hallway was yet another staircase, and I wanted to see if anyone had survived what happened on this floor before I descended. The door to the mess hall was on my left. As I turned to face the door, I thought I heard something overhead and shone my light up. It sounded like movement, but I was alone in the hallway. Figuring I must be just a little bit fidgety, I stood squared towards the door and hit the panel to slide it open. As it moved to the left, I immediately swept my lights over the area and saw the same thing as the initial hallway. Broken light fixtures, wiring taken out from the wall and chewed out. I noticed just about all the tables and chairs were knocked over, plenty of blood all over the place, yet still no bodies. As I shone the light towards the bottom, I heard the sound of movement across the tile, like fingernails being tapped along the tile floor as whatever it was ran away. I discharged 2 shotgun rounds following the movement, yet there was nothing but holes where the rounds made contact with the floor. I cautiously moved towards where I heard the initial noise and saw food cans from the mess hall line had recently been opened, except these weren't open with a can opener. They had been chewed through. As I moved back to the hallway to make my way to the living room quarters, my mind started to wonder what type of animal could chew through metal and be completely fine. After moving down the hallway a few more meters, I came to the door to the living quarters. The door opened and I shined my light inside and saw that this area was virtually untouched. The room was about 30 meters long and 10 feet wide. It was like a barracks that we stayed in during the basic training, with bunk bed cots all along the length of the room, each with a wall locker. I shut the door behind me and noticed that all the lights still functioned, and there was a bathroom at the end of the room. All of the lockers were the same. Open doors with all kinds of gear thrown around, as if the owners were rushing to grab their equipment and go. All except one. With the barrel of my shotgun trained on the locker, I began to move towards it at a steady pace. I got close enough, and, as I grasped the handle and ripped open the locker door, a short and stout man fell out, crying. The man lay on the ground sobbing like a baby, curled up in a fetal position. He wore brown slacks and a green shirt with a white lab coat on. He was a particularly overweight man with rectangular rimless glasses and was balding on top of the brownish hair. Training my weapon on him the whole time, I looked around the room to make sure nothing had changed. When I was comfortable with my surrounding, I grabbed him and hoisted him up against the wall so that he was sitting and looking at me. "Look at me and tell me your name," I said very sternly towards him. Jacobs. My name is Dr. Jacobs and I'm the head scientist for this research facility. Well, was the head scientist. Job titles seem to disappear when experiments run loose, he muttered out between crying. Well, Dr. Jacobs, I happen to be with the sanitation department and it seems that we have quite a mess on our hands. Can you care to explain exactly what the fuck happened down here? I've been in firefights that looked like they had less shit going on here. And I already know that you were doing human experimentation, so skip all the exponential bullshit and tell me exactly where things went wrong, I stated. As you know, we were splicing human DNA with other species in an attempt to create superior beings as a form of biological warfare. Well, the problem is, our genome is very unique, so most hybrids couldn't actually handle the introduction of new genes and promptly died after we introduced the new DNA. Most hybrids we were successful with were one species, too successful with, honestly. He muttered to himself. Periplaneta americana, also known as the common household cockroach. When we extracted the DNA from one of the teenagers and mixed it with the roaches, it just didn't mix well, but it began to evolve on its own. Over the weeks, the roach did not only begin to grow to the size of a Rottweiler, it began to show remarkable intelligence, able to distinguish different people, objects, hell, even grasp the concept of ideas. Wait a second, you were telling me that there is a cockroach the size of a 100-pound dog down there? A fucking cockroach caused this much mayhem? And what happened to the children? I interrupted. Yes, a cockroach caused all this damage. There were no more children. When we extracted samples of their DNA, we had to take it from a very specific part of their brain. They did not survive the procedure. Well, one day it appeared the roach had died. It was flipped over on its back and wasn't showing any vital sign on the machines that we had it hooked up to. He let out a very deep sigh before he went on into the next part. When we sent in some scientists to examine what caused this, it was then that we realised the error in our judgment. The roach snapped awake and chewed open the throats of a pair that went in to examine it. We tried to shut the door, but we were too slow. It retained all of its physical properties and was able to squeeze through the crack of the door. We sounded the panic alarm and grabbed as much gear as we could and tried to leave. The only problem was the vault auto-locks after 30 days when the panic alarm is activated to keep any contamination inside. The only way to open it is from the outside. He took a couple of breaths before he got to the next part. We sent in a team down in the basement to search for it, as they loved the moist, warm environments. They didn't come back. I became scared and voted that we should stay in here. Others said we had powers in numbers, and that we should just go kill it. I locked the door behind them, and shortly after, all I heard in the hallways was screaming. They were banging on the door to let them back in, but I was too scared, and so I went and hid in my locker, as I heard their cries for help as the roach got them. And here we are. He finally finished. So tell me then, how do I kill it? And where are the documentation files for this facility located? I sternly questioned him. They are in the research lab, in the basement on the main computer. There is no password for it. You merely turn it on and you have access to all the files this facility generated in its 9 months of operation. To kill the roach is simple. Do as you would with a regular sized roach. Just know that its strength and defense have grown with its ratio of its size, and that it has superior intelligence. Don't think it will be as simple as stomping on it with a boot. He said, eyeing me up and down. Excellent. One more question. Is there any way to decontaminate this facility? Yes, on the research terminal, type in the command flood. The facility was built with a failsafe combustion protocol. 2 minutes after the command has been typed, the vault door will shut and lock. Once that happens, the facility will be filled with a flammable gas and it will light the air on the facility on fire. This will then happen multiple times over the course of 48 hours as it makes sure there is nothing organic left alive in here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to make my way to the surface, he stated as he waddled past me. Hold up there, Doc. After all you told me, I can't just let you walk away. You know too much for your own good. And that's the last thing this country needs, is you spilling this to the media. Or worse, giving this knowledge to our enemies and letting them have access to create superbugs. I said in a very monotone voice, sounding almost robotic. His eyes went wide with fear as he came to the conclusion of what was about to happen. I trained the shotgun on his chest and blew out a hole the size of a basketball where his organs used to be. I spit on his corpse in disgust after he fell to the ground, convulsing as he had attempted to take his last few breaths with the lungs he no longer had. The blood began to pool around his wound on the floor, and he spit up the blood when his eyes finally went cold. People like him always disgusted me. I have no sympathy for someone who would sacrifice children like this. As I reloaded my shotgun and made sure that all of my weapons were loaded and ready, I opened the door back to the hallway and made my way back to the intersection I had originally gone down. Typical that the basement was where the main terminal was, and typical that there was a fucking £100 cockroach running around this facility. Specifically, in the basement. I approached the staircase to the basement at the end of the hall. I took a large breath and then began my descent into literal hell. The government human experiments. The roach. Final. Let's get straight into that. The basement was the same deep red colour as the other parts of the facility. Not like I expected much different. These jobs can never be made easy. After I took the last step down and I was on the floor of the basement, I looked around and found myself in a rather large room. I realised that this is where the source of the smell was permeating from. It was incredibly strong here, smelling like someone ate rotten eggs and then threw their rotten smelling shit in the oven on 450. I have no idea how I managed to not throw up everywhere, but I'd be lying if I said I never got that feeling of it rising up in my throat. As I began to sweep my flashlight around the area to take in my surroundings, that's when I noticed that something was strange. The walls were not like the other walls of the facility per se. They were covered in this very viscous substance, looking almost like very thick globular honey. I walked over and drew my blade from the boot. I plunged the blade into the phlegm-looking gunk and was shocked how my blade stuck fast. I began to struggle to retrieve my blade, and after breaking a sweat I was finally able to wrench my blade free and return it to its sheath. Dear God, the roach made a nest down here. It's made a fucking nest. I had to speak aloud, as if I was almost in disbelief of it even being possible. If there was one thing that I remembered from my biology courses when I was a kid, things only make a nest or home when they are ready to settle down and start reproducing. The weight of that thought snapped my head clear, as I needed to solve this problem, and I needed to solve it soon. I made my way down the room to where it broke into a smaller room with a door on each of the 3 walls. I tried to find a label or anything for the doors, but there was no luck, just more of this gunk covering everything. I hated the idea of exploring this area with a roach I had yet to see roving around, but I needed to find the terminal to clean up this mess. Picking the door to my left, I tried to use the door handle, but it wouldn't open. It was at this point that I was losing my patience, and I just kicked the door in. I was planning on obliterating this facility anyway. Fuck preserving anything. And after kicking it in, I swept the light around and I was appalled by what I found. Inside was a little room, no bigger than the storage unit I had my weapons in. Pasted to the walls were some of the research scientists. Some of them were missing arms or legs. One unlucky guy was missing his head. But the most shocking thing was their upper body. Almost all of their upper bodies were missing the skin on the outside, as well as the organs in the chest cavity, and their rib cages looked as if they were being chipped away, missing tiny pieces all over. They looked as if something had been gnawing on their rib bones. It was at this moment that I heard a grunt on the ground. "Help me! Please! Whoever is there, please help me!" The woman groaned out, sounding incredibly defeated. I made my way over to where the sound came from and looked down at the woman who lay on the ground. She looked like she could have been no more than 24. She wore a blue dress that looked like it had been chewed away, and a bloodied lab coat lay a few feet to my right. She turned her head towards me for the next time she was speaking. "Please, help me. I didn't want this to happen. None of this. Please save me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," she said, her voice beginning to get slurred. It was then, when her words began to get slurred, that I noticed the bump on her forehead was moving. Then I noticed it wasn't just a bump on her forehead, it was her whole face. As I took a few steps back, keeping my lights trained on her, I noticed these bumps were all over her body, moving in unison, moving as if something was about to happen. It was then the tiny baby roaches erupted out of her body. They tore open holes in her skin to crawl out of, tiny shots of blood shooting up out of each hole they erupted from. They were clawing and crawling out of her eyes, out of her mouth. There must have been at least 1,000 of them crawling out of this woman. I had seen some messed up things in my life, but nothing could prepare me for being witness to this. With a yell of surprise, I began to move back towards the door I had entered. I ripped one of my grenades off my chest and slid it along the floor. It made contact with her body, and in that same instant I cleared the doorway and rolled to my right. To give you an idea what it's like once these grenades go off, you ever go to those Japanese hibachi restaurants and they light that big ass flame on the grill? Yep, it's like that, except the flame is almost 50 times that size and burns at an almost 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. When I looked inside, all I could see was some leftover ash from the body of the woman and the men, and the gunk seemed to have crystallized from the heat. As I was examining the room, I heard that familiar sound of toenails on tile, except this was more of toenails on concrete. The sound got increasingly quicker and louder as the sound made its way to me. I twisted around and began shining my light all over the floor and walls looking for what it was that was making this noise. When I saw nothing is when I had the thought to try my flashlight on the ceiling. As I slowly moved the light beams to the ceiling, I saw what appeared to be 4 roaches the size of pugs. One of them flapped their wings at me and twitched its antennae, almost as if issuing the challenge to me. I immediately began to fire off my shotgun, still in disbelief of what I was seeing. I nailed 2 of them before they could move, and they exploded in a rain of hard exoskeleton and roach guts. A wing the size of a large banana landed to my right. The other 2 I hadn't hit began to run on opposite sides of the room and then charge me, coordinating their attack, showing an almost human intelligence. I turned and ran towards one, sending a shotgun round towards it on the ceiling. As I had misjudged the speed of the roach, so the round only blew off the back half of it. I heard a thud as it landed on the ground, and then that familiar nail on surface clicking. I did a somersault forward and drew my knife as I began to twist around. The other roach had begun flying towards me, as if to land on my chest. As it closed the distance, I noticed the razor-sharp teeth in its mouth constantly chomping. I turned my body into the slash and cleaved the roach completely in half. Its lower, upper body continued to twitch separately, almost as if its nervous system didn't realise what had happened. I made my way over to the upper body and crushed it beneath my boot, hearing that resounding crunching sound as I shattered its exoskeleton. I made my way to where the other roach was as it began to crawl away. As it heard my boots on the concrete, it turned around, and I shit you not, it made eye contact with me. As I got closer, it hissed at me as if it was trying to get some final words out. I viciously stomped on its head and body into the ground, crunch over and over again until nothing than a crunchy pulp remained. I'm really hoping that these were the biggest ones besides the original. I had some spare ammo, but I didn't bring enough to fight an army of roaches. My best bet was going to be to delete the files on that terminal and initiate the flood sequence. With yet another deep breath, I turned towards the room the squad had come through, and once again began venturing deeper into the nest. As I made my way down a long winding maintenance tunnel, the gunk on the sides of the wall seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. My guess being that, as it was because I was getting closer and closer to the centre of the nest, I hadn't heard anything move in quite a while, and that honestly put me on edge more than if I was constantly hearing noises. There was almost a weight to the air as well as I was moving down the tunnel, a weight that I felt all too familiar. Call it a sixth sense, but any time I had felt this before, it was always right before something bad was about to happen, right before an attack was coming. As I proceeded through the only door throughout the entire tunnel, I entered a rather large room that was completely black. The only light was that which came from my shotgun and helmet lights. Wait, no. I saw a small green glow in the corner about 50 feet across from me. This had to be the central terminal. There was no other place it could have been. Despite the excitement I felt with that thought that I was about to be able to get the fuck out of here, I still proceeded cautiously. As I spun my light around the room, I found the fate of the reminiscing scientists. They had been dragged down here and glued to the wall. Their arms and legs were spread out like a star pattern, with gunk fastening their wrists, ankles, necks, and mouths. But these scientists were different from all the others. These people were still alive. I could tell from how their eyes followed me as I walked by, and the way their arms and legs were struggling against the biological restraints. I hated these people for what they did, but even this seemed like a cruel way to go. Being held as a fucking fodder for the goddamn crime against nature. It was at this moment something dropped to my right. With a sharp breath of surprise, I swept my light around to see what had startled me. I noticed nothing I had not before until I took a look down at my boots. It was a small translucent orb about the size of a gumball you get from those quarter machines. As I knelt down a bit closer and shined my light on it, I saw that the orb was filled with a liquid. Swimming around in that liquid was a very tiny roach. Realising where it came from, I very slowly shined my light upward towards the ceiling. That was the moment the blood in my veins iced over. It was about 20 feet tall and completely covering the top of the ceiling with thousands of orbs, just like the one that fell near me. It was no wonder there was no light in this room. The layers on layers of eggs pasted to the ceiling blocked out all of the light. I stomped on the egg that had fallen near me and put my shotgun on the holster on my back. With that, I drew out my twin pistols and began to put headshots in all of the scientists that were pasted to the wall in the room. After eliminating all 15 of them, I put my pistols back and took the shotgun back out. I hated the scientists for what they created, but no one deserved to live as a host literally being eaten alive by thousands of these little parasites. I had finally reached the terminal and saw that the screen and keyboard were virtually untouched. With this, I navigated through the screen to the directory where the records were located. I began to dump them in a recycling bin on screen, and after I'd done that, I emptied it. After I initiated the flood sequence, I planned on leaving one of my grenades to vaporise the remainder of the computer. I brought up the screen to start the sequence and held the mouse over the initialise button. It was at this moment I heard the sound of wings flapping, and immediately whipping round, the showdown was about to begin. The roach faced me, standing at about my mid-height while on its legs. I don't know what stopped me from blasting rounds at its head immediately, but I just didn't. The roach looked almost sad. If you can imagine an ugly fucking insect like a roach being able to display emotion. It was then something happened that nothing my decade and a half worth of training prepared me for. Something that made my jaw drop through the fucking floor. It spoke.
Why?
It questioned.
Why kill? Did nothing wrong.
Are you fucking kidding me here? You murdered about 50 scientists or captured them and kept them alive for using as food. You don't think that's wrong? I angrily yelled at it. In the back of my head I was wondering what type of drugs I must have been taking earlier this morning. Here I was, in an underground science lab, having a conversation, a debate, with a fucking insect.
Tried to be peaceful. They wanted to destroy. Acted as needed.
It spoke.
Followed instinct. Find home, find food, reproduce.
Well, you see, there lies the problem. You're a goddamn abomination against nature. If you reproduce and more of you appear, that's going to be a big problem for all the people on this planet. You are a pest and a parasite, and I'm the pest control, I said to it. As I finished my last sentence, I let loose a shotgun blast, trying to catch it off guard. Whatever they did to it must have increased its reflexes because it turned around very quickly and threw its wings out. My initial shotgun blast made contact and blew off the wings. So, I at least knew that it was going to stay grounded for the duration of this fight. As bits and pieces of its wings exploded over the room, it let out a screech and ran in my direction. It charged into me and knocked me down onto my back. I aimed my barrel as it crawled over me, but before I could pull the trigger, the roach took a giant bite through my shotgun. The light went out and half of my barrel was missing. I threw the remainder of the weapon aside and punched the roach in the head as hard as I could. It fell off of me and scattered away on the wall. I stood up and drew both of my pistols, performing circles in place to scan the room for wherever it went. This was bad news for me. I was in its home and on its turf in the darkness. A sense of panic appeared in the back of my mind, gnawing away at my confidence, telling me I should have just hit the flood sequence and put a bullet in my brain to end it all. As I was pushing these thoughts out of my mind, I was hit from behind and began falling forward. I did a somersault and turned around and saw it running towards me. I began to immediately let loose a volley of rounds, hearing the sound of some penetrated into the body of the roach, while others merely bounced off of its exoskeleton. As it made its way to me, it stood up on its hind legs. At the same time, it used its upper two arms to knock my pistols out of my hands, and its mid-two legs to shove me back down. This was it. This was the end for me. It began to slowly move towards me more and more, savouring the fact that it had won, enjoying the moment of its victory. It was at this moment that I remembered the knife that was attached to my boot. I drew my legs up to my chest, acting as if I was scared of it, pretending to cower so that I could get my knife closer to my hand. As it drew towards me, extending its front two legs, is when I made my move. I whipped my knife out and slashed the top half of its front two legs off. It began to screech as its arms were flipping around all over the place, a dark green blood spewing out of its stumps. It turned its face towards me, and I got an up-close look at its ugly face. I kicked it square in the face and it fell onto its back, the blood soaking everything around us. As it began spinning around trying to ready itself, I made my move and jumped on its abdomen. I hacked off its mid and hind legs to make sure it was immobilised, and with each leg I severed, the roach began to screech even louder and writhe harder, but I stayed on top. After its legs, I proceeded to take my knife and continuously stab its underbelly. Thrusting my knife in and out, blood began to shoot up onto my face and armour, but I was beyond caring. All I felt at this moment was rage. When I finally stabbed it enough times to make a basketball-sized hole, I took one of my grenades and shoved it in as far as I could to the roach's belly. I snatched my hand out of its organs and jumped off as far back as I could. I heard the roach give one final ear-splitting screech before it burst into a giant fireball of guts and charred roach. I approached the corpse of the roach and looked at it with my light. Its face turned to me, and it gurgled on the blood that was seeping out of its mouth. I took my boot and planted it firmly on this fucker's head. Enjoying the resounding crunch it made, I placed my knife back in my boot and went to the terminal. I clicked the button on the screen and then made my way back to the entrance. Saver, it's Conte. The mission is complete. No survivors. All copies of the data erased. I spoke over the phone after having made it back to my apartment. Excellent work, Conte. There will be a black SUV outside soon to take you in for your debrief. We want to know all the details about what happened in that lab. He responded and then hung up the phone. 30 minutes later, I heard a honk of the SUV arriving. I finished my cup of green tea and buttoned up the jacket of my black suit. As I stepped outdoors, I put on my sunglasses and made my way to the vehicle outside. As I made my way down the stairs, I began to recount every little detail that occurred in the past 72 hours. I opened the door to the SUV and got inside. I hated debriefs. A bunch of annoying fucking questions about what occurred. As if they needed to record it, considering no one will ever know about any of these missions. I shut the door and the vehicle took off. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed that mini-series there. Of course, as ever, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. Huge thank you to the author there over on Reddit, Shade LSMRA. Fantastic work, really enjoyed that, and it was a refreshing story. Different type of monster entirely there. Remember guys, if you're going to high school and you've got a creepy basement with a metal door, best not to investigate or go poking around for too much information or insight into what lays behind that door. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.